At this time, the public is permitted to address the committee if there's anything they wish to discuss, not on the agenda. I need approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
First. Right, I didn't know who the second. Oh, second, Tatson. Just want to make sure Christina gets it. Yes, ma'am. Call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Consent calendar?
Move approval.
Second.
First, second. Any discussion? Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Regular agenda items, starting 13.0, legislative update. Moving along.
Good morning, commissioners. Haven't even had a chance to have any of my coffee yet. So I'll start very briefly with a quick federal update. You do have something in your packet with an update from our federal advocate, and as you can see, it's heavily budget focused. And so this is appropriations season in Washington, D.C. We went there in early May to try to get our share of some dollars, so we hope to see the fruits of that trip at some point later this summer. But again, we're working hard trying to uncover all those little pockets of money that we might be able to apply for and put to good use in Contra Costa. So we're keeping our eyes and ears open. With that, there's quite a bit of activity at the state level, and so our state advocate, Mark Watts, is here to give you an update on quite a few items this morning, so I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you, Lindsay. Good morning, commissioners. As Lindsay indicated, it's a pretty busy time. We have Friday is the last day for bills to get out of their first house, and so the entire focus of each day, each of this week is on that. And in the backdrop, you have the Budget Conference Committee working away. And there's a pretty sizable issue that needs to be confronted in the transportation arena, and that deals with cap and trade, and I'll touch on that in a moment. But there's a couple key bills I want to bring you up to speed on. As you are aware, because the bill passed some time ago, AB 1665, that provides the necessary authority for you to impose the tax for a self-help measure, has been double referred in the Senate to Transportation and Housing and Governance and Finance. The good thing about this measure is that it is not an appropriations bill, so it only needs to clear those two policy committees. The deadline's the end of June, so we expect this bill to be on the floor by the last week of June, and we'll press to get it taken up into the governor before the summer recess. So that's the game plan. We're working very closely, the team here, myself, working very closely with Assemblymember Bonilla's office, and I think all systems are A-OK at this point in time. The other key measure, AB 1592, that deals with autonomous vehicles, that enjoyed a pretty rapid transit through the Assembly, and has been sitting and waiting to be referred. It's been referred to transportation, but the date hasn't been set. Conversations with the consultant appears that June 14th is the most likely date, and we're trying to keep that date so we have more maximum flexibility as we go forward. But as is predictable, when folks take a deeper look at bills and they get into the second house, there has been some issues arise. The Consumer Watchdog Organization has taken an interest in the bill, and there's others that automobile manufacturers that are taking a look at the bill and have offered some ideas and suggestions for amendments. We're working with Assemblymember Bonilla's office on what's acceptable, what needs to be addressed, and whether or not we actually need to move forward with any amendments at all. So we hope by mid-June we'll have a good idea on how that bill's moving forward. A measure that was raised last time, SB 885, was approved yesterday by the Senate. It was an interesting vote. It was, I think, 26-4, and a bunch of people staying off. And I think that reflects the interest in the bill. There's a lot of folks who have a lot of sympathy for the measure. I would say that the engineering companies that are behind this, and just to remind you, this is the measure that says that the design professionals shall only have the duty to indemnify themselves or to provide, not be required to provide first dollar expense for contracts larger than for which they are not the lead entity. So that bill did pass. As I indicated, there's a lot of support for the measure. In addition, our public agency partners throughout the state are deeply concerned because of the potential shift in risk under the measure. And I think last time we spoke about it, we didn't come to a conclusion. I think my recommendation is to be in a somewhat neutral position at this point in time and watch as this moves forward in case there are amendments that come out. The author did indicate on the floor that she'd be continuing to work with those public agencies and try to figure out some way to address, or maybe not address, but try to address some of their issues. So that would be my suggestion. And I think the final thing I want to catch you up on is in the world of cap and trade. I think there was $1.4 billion that had been left over from last year that had been unexpended. There was an expectation there. I guess some folks may still have that expectation that for the 16-17 year that the auction revenues would generate $2 billion. So you had about almost $3.5 billion that has been subject to ongoing discussions, negotiations, and uncertainty as the budget process approached. In the budget process, the Assembly and the Senate both adopted overall expenditure plans that were very similar to the governor's, deviated in some new small programs here and there, but in the main, the three look very similar with some exceptions. The news, as you know, is that the May auction, instead of producing $500 million that was expected, I think everybody had hopes that when the speculators earlier in the year had started dumping their emission credits, that would stop. Well, the results of this auction produced only $10 million. And if you take a step back from that and realize that if you were expecting $2 billion and 60% of that's already pre-authorized under continuous appropriations for high-speed rail, transit capital, low carbon, and affordable housing and sustainable communities, those are all proportionate shares. So if the $10 million is an indicator of how the rest of the revenues are going to go for the remainder of 16-17, then those large categories of preordained funding are going to be splitting a much smaller pie. And not to mention the 40% reserved by the governor for his proposals. So, I think there's a lesson here. The state transportation revenues have been untrustworthy. The gas tax is just not doing what it was doing for decades. And then the price-based excise tax, that resulted from the tax swap, that's been a shocker. And, I think the lessons learned from self-help counties is that the state revenues that you count on, you can't always count on being there at the right point in time. So I think the lesson, if this materializes as badly as it looks right now for cap and trade, it's yet another source of transportation funding that the state has tried to provide, but is just unable to for a lot of different reasons. So taking on a self-help responsibility, I think, is the prudent thing for individual counties that have taken on the responsibility to improve the state system as well as their own local systems and maintenance. So that's my overview picture, and I'd be glad to answer questions.
Questions? Thanks for some of the gloomy news, by the way.
First question, I was going to say I've been in continual contact with Assemblymember Bonilla's office as well, and so I was expecting to attend the June 14th hearings for 1665, and if it makes sense, if the other semi-autonomous vehicle bill is up the same day, if I could get briefed, I could also talk about that one.
Sure would be nice.
Okay. Well, you're better. You're better recognized than I am. I'm just saying, I was going to be there for 1665.
Hey, a tag team never hurts.
Right.
On that point, Ms. Bonilla's staff is meeting with Randy Chin, the chief consultant, today on 1592. So I'll communicate with them on the way home that if it's still possible, or it is possible, to arrange them both in the same day, that we should strive for that. My only caution would be this late emerging opposition may require more work to get amendments that can be agreed upon in shape to be presented at that date. So that's the only cautionary note I would put out there.
Yeah, and as I'm going primarily for 1665 anyway, so.
Yeah.
We've answered Randy Chin's questions about liability insurance.
Yes.
Yeah. And the other piece is the privacy issue. We don't want to know the people's credit card numbers and their social security numbers and all that information. What we're interested in is gathering data on origin and destination. As I mentioned, when we worked at Caltrans many years ago, how we gathered that information was hand an envelope to a driver and say, please fill this out, and we'd never get any information. We didn't know where they're coming from or going to. And so now with electronics and the wireless technologies, we can get that information. It's very valuable on making sure you set your transit options correctly to where the riders are and where they're coming from and where they're going to. So,
Particularly in a last mile solution that
Exactly.
you're looking at here. So that's very important.
Mark, thanks for the update. I was just going to weigh in on 885 that I think we ought to be neutral on this point. It's changed as people and our design professionals that work for us. The message is to make it real simple. Only public agencies seem to do this. They put in contracts because some lawyers way back when said you have a duty to defend everybody, even though, so if I'm the architect engineer on the project and you're working on it with another company, I have to defend you. And my insurance company says, no, I'm defending you. And so the law that's being proposed here is to say, because it's an uninsurable event, so while you put it in the contract and you say, well, we'll be at risk. Well, no, you're at risk because the minute you put it in the contract, if you have a claim, the insurance company says, you violated the policy, that we will not cover that. So now you have zero insurance. This is trying to cure that. And it's slowly changing. And with a 24-6 vote out of the Senate, it's starting to change. And people finally realizing it's not going to change liability. It's actually going to protect all of us in the business. In private world, we don't do this. It's just somehow it's a leftover. This is the second time we've done it. And I think in our case, to be nice to our friends and other areas that we play with, that I think we ought to just be neutral at this point and see what the language comes out. So thank you, Mark, for that.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? You're not heading back up to Sacramento, are you?
So
It's going to be very warm.
It's going to be hot in the building and outside of the building.
That's what I thought.
Chair, I think we were actually hoping for a motion and a
Okay,
vote on
then-
that neutral
okay,
position.
Then we'll.
I would move that we take a neutral position on 8.
First and a second. Did we get the right second? Okay. Okay. Got it, Christina? Call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Done. 14-0, proposed budget for CCTA, Congestion Management Agency.
Thanks, Mark.
Oh, thank you,
Stay
Mark.
cool.
Turn on the AC.
Good morning, Commissioners. I was just here last month presenting the draft budget for the 16-17 fiscal year. The CCTA budget procedures, we start in April, and we get to the April Planning Commission for the CMA budget. And after that, we work with the project staff and the other staff members to roll this out. So in May, we present the draft budget to you and go through everything that we're proposed to do for 16-17. It shows up on the May Authority Board meeting as an informational item, and we come back with any changes to you in June. Later this month at the Authority meeting, we'll do a public hearing to adopt the budget for the fiscal year 16-17. Since I last presented it to you, we've made two changes, a very minor change. We moved $1.5 million of RM2 funding out of the budget for 16-17, and we changed the title for Peter Engel from the programs manager to the director of programs. So congratulations to Peter. And other than that, there's no additional changes, but I'll go through the budget. We can quickly go through this as you have other things on the agenda today. Sales tax revenues, we're going with a 3% increase. It looks about $2.5 million increase. The federal, state, and local revenues we'll go through later on in a slide, but those change based off of the allocation of using the funds for the projects and the timing of the projects. One thing we like to do is use all the outside sources prior to using the Measure J funds. We also have down here the bond proceeds, and you can see that that's being reduced $34 million. In October of 2015, we issued about $100 million of proceeds for an additional bond. We had some leftover funds in the prior year, so we're going to use up that full amount, and propose for next year we're going to use about $45.5 million, which is the remaining amount of funds available. Other sources is going to, once we've used the bond proceeds and the outside external sources of federal, state, and local revenues, we have program funds that have accumulated in prior years that are programmed through the strategic plan for specific projects. The timing of the other cities as well and getting projects done for the TLC and the ped bike path is going to be used. So that's what the $42 million is. The project section is being reduced about $25.7 million. Again, Highway 4 is being closed out. The Highway 4 160 connector ramp is done. That's winding down. One of the aux lanes is moving forward next year, and we also have the I-80 project as well. The program section is usually fixed every single year because we have the allocations based off of the percentage of money that we're collecting. Also, there's some small projects in there as well, which is the result of the decrease of $2.5 million, the timing for things. The planning section is being reduced about $2.9 million. The major factor in that is the Barbary Coast contract is coming to an end in the public outreach, so we've done the majority of the work there. Administrative section is coming down about $100,000. What's in there is the reallocation of some salaries from the admin section over to PPM, which is increased for next year to about a little over $600,000. So we'll utilize those funds as well. Debt service is being increased about $5 million due to the bond issuance of October of last year. Bond payments are done in September and March of every year, so we didn't have one payment for the new bond in September of last year, so that payment will be in March and September. So that increases at about $5 million. As I mentioned, sales tax revenue is continuing to increase. We're looking at a 3% projection for next year. Right now, we are on target for the budget of $82.4 million. Hopefully for the authority board meeting, I will have the third quarter information to you. It usually comes out around the 10th or the 15th of every month, so I'll quickly turn that around. As we're looking at here is the first 6 months of the fiscal year of the activity that we've had. We're up 6.2% over the prior year. Gas tax at the top is down $571,000 due to the prices at the pump. Hopefully the little increase we've seen will help us out a little bit in the months to come. This slide here goes through our sales tax and shows all our federal, state, and local grants that we receive. And as you can see, it has went up in 2014, 2015, and all of that is the timing of the CIP projects. As we've mentioned before, the Caldecott Tunnel was really big in 2014, 2015. We've had Highway 4. 2016, we've got some Highway 4 and the 160 connector ramp, and next year we have the aux lanes and the I-80 projects are the big ones. As we discussed the different funding sources, RM2 is projected to be about a decrease of about $16.7 million. The completion phases for the SR4 East widening, utilizing the remaining balance earmarked on the I-80 San Pablo project. The BATA funds decreased about $11.9 million for completion of the SR4 160 connector ramp and additional funds for the I-80 San Pablo project. The STIP funds increased about $4.1 million for the I-680 carpool lane completion, ECRA funds decreased about $3.1 million to reflect the completion of the utility relocation and fully expense the original $8 million on Balfour Interchange. Other funds increased $6.2 million on the anticipation of receiving $5.9 million of TDV funds for the I-80 aux lanes. There's an agreement with the town of Danville for these funds for the completion out there. So we were expecting to receive those in beginning of July. And as we talked about the Measure J capital projects, we have just Measure J, we have about $82.7 million earmarked for these projects here. Once we allocate all the external funding, we have bond proceeds and MSJ program, the remaining balance of about $58.4 million. As we break down the dollar that we collect on the sales tax measure, we see that 42.5% goes to the capital projects. Local street maintenance gets about 20%, and some of the other ones, the transportation for seniors, 6.5%, express bus, 4.3%, and we've gone through this before. So we're going to get about $85 million. Our external revenues for these things is 74.22. That includes the $45.5 million of bond proceeds in there. So once you factor in all of these, you have the program reserves that we're drawing down on. That's programmed for the strategic plan of about $35.2 million. Then at the bottom, we have Measure C projects. We're getting about $6.4 million. That's interest earnings, in addition to some external funding sources as well as the TDV funding of about $5.9 million. And our expenditures for Measure C is expected to be about $14 million. So we're drawing down on the remaining balance of Measure C about $7.6 million. As we've covered the CIP projects, the proposed expenditures to the authority as a whole is $209.9 million. As we look at the Measure J projects, this breaks down the expenditure categories. I'll quickly go through this as we've kind of covered it in the prior two slides. We've got about $133 million in the prior year, down to about $100.2 million for next fiscal year. You can see the second line down, the CIP2, which is the BART East Contra Costa Rail Extension. It's going to go down about $28 million. We're paying off those pieces. The other large decrease in there is the SR4 East widening. Those projects are winding down. That's a decrease again of $16.6 million. The I-80 corridor is about $14.2 million. That's going to be an increase of about $3.2 million. As we know, these projects change with the flow and weather permitting and everything else, and environmental, I think, as well makes a difference. So that sums up that slide. On the administrative side, our budget is about $2.1 million. Salaries and benefits are going to be about $700,000 and represents 0.81% of the 1% limitation that's set aside in the strategic plan. The authority's pension and post-employment rates reflect no increases. They stay the same. A couple years ago, we paid off the PERS liability, which has kept our rates low. The programs is about $52 million, which is a decrease of about $2.5 million. Expenditures are based on the percentage of allocation in the Measure J expenditure plan. Local and sub-regional street maintenance increased about $500,000, which is a result of the extra sales tax revenue we collect. Transportations for livable community projects decreased about $3.1 million. That's all based off of the timing the local cities finish their projects and start the new projects. Planning is about $5 million. That's a decrease of about $2.9 million. Expenditures decrease due to the majority of public outreach for the tax expenditure plan being completed in the prior fiscal year, which we're in now, FY16. $1.8 million for the CMA and CMP support. Those projects would be the West Contra Costa High Capacity Study, the PED Bike Plan, and several contracts and studies are partially funded by grant revenues. The debt service we discussed earlier is up about $5 million. Principal amount paid for next year is going to be about $12.5 million. Interest due is about $17 million. And then we're going to draw down the remaining bond proceeds for capital projects. With that, that concludes our presentation of the budget for next year. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
First of all, great report. That's, given the complexity of all the buckets that we have and everything, you do a wonderful job in keeping it simple. Just had a suggestion on page 14.5 of the staff report, and it said, you said it differently on your slide, which this is at the very bottom of the page. It says Measure J expenditures exceed current year revenue projections by 33, and then there's a listing of those. I think when somebody reads that, it looks like we're overspending. In fact, I think on your slide in there it says the prior year commitments and things. That maybe we could rewrite that so that it's clear to the reader that it's not, we're not over budget. I think that the implication that I have, and I saw it in your report. So otherwise, I think everything else looked great. Thank you.
Thank you. So I concur that it looks great and very much like the detail and the clarity of the budget. I had a question about my favorite close-to-home project, the Caldecott Tunnel. I noticed that it continues, the project that keeps on giving, and that the project expenses are going to go down by more than 50%. But I was curious to note that the project management services don't decline, and I'm trying to understand why that's the case.
So I'll handle that one. So as we all know, the project is done. The main project's done. Landscape project is continuing. The Caltrans is, and I believe some of our consultants as well. Is that correct, Ivan? They're working to close out the project, do what's called as-built. So that's to make sure that all the final plans reflect all the changes made in the field. Been a long process. They've recently reached a global settlement with the contractor. As we've reported through the years, there's been a number of construction issues. So there are some costs that trickle in. I don't necessarily want to report a final number today, but by the authority meeting, I hope to be able to report a pretty happy figure about a savings that will return to the authority.
Thank you. And do you expect that the 2016-17 budget year will be the final year for this project, or will there likely be some ongoing expenses?
No.
Yes, although the landscaping contract is pretty much done, there is a planned establishment period for 3 years that will go on. And also we did the fund exchange, to fund projects in Berkeley and Oakland that going to continue until, as part of the Caldecott settlement, that will continue through probably 2018 or 2020, actually.
But those are not to exceed fixed costs. So we'll see some budget expenditures, but the overall cost will be known within a few weeks.
Great. Thank you.
So I guess we should expect a future consent calendar to include yet one more contract extension after the one that we did this morning that extends to December of 2017?
No, not really, no. That's the construction co-op agreement. That will be ending. It's just we will have we have a separate co-op for the plant establishment and landscaping. We have different agreement with the Alameda CTC for
so it'll
the
be just an
settlement.
administrative extension rather than a construction extension.
Correct.
Okay.
Board on the recommendation for approval.
I have a first and a second. Any more discussion? Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Done.
Thank you.
15-0.
Good morning, APC Chair Taylor, members of the APC. I'm Randy Carlton, CFO. I'd like to invite Peter Schellenberger up to the speaker station there. And the item before you is a report. It's a new report that has been prepared by PFM. And the purpose is to provide in this age of transparency all the relative information related to our financial indebtedness, and as well as a report on looking at our potential refinancing opportunities, as well as giving you an update about our future debt plans. So we think that this report will not only provide the board and staff with a good snapshot of the financial markets and where we are on our debt portfolio and our ratings and et cetera, but it'll also be a helpful report for our bondholders and the credit rating agencies and other stakeholders that follow the authority. So we wanted to take a few minutes and introduce the report. I suspect that in future quarters it will be a routine report that will be on the consent calendar, but wanted to take a couple of minutes and drill down a bit in it today. And I've asked Peter Schellenberger to prepare a few slides that really follow the written report, and then would be happy to take any questions. I'd like to introduce Peter Schellenberger.
Thank you, Randy. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. So as Randy noted, there's two sources of material. There is a report, which you can read at your leisure. And is that better? That's good. There's a report, a quarterly report, which you could read at your leisure, and we find these increasingly helpful because the market is continually changing. Volatility is the theme and has been the theme for the last 2 years, really. And folks like CCTA want to know, okay, within the changing market, what's the impact on my portfolio? Are there opportunities out there? Is there something we should be thinking about and doing? So the first piece of this report is to create the market context, and the second piece is to address that second question. Within the market, what opportunities are there for you? So that's sort of how the slides here are structured. I'll start, and then Randy could add when I miss something here. A few bullets on page 3. Just to give an overview, I started with volatility, and that sure enough is the theme. If we go back a year ago to June 2015, we saw the S&P 500, the equity market, hit a peak, and the economy was roaring. And the FOMC, the Fed, was thinking, all right, we're prepared to increase rates and take some of the heat out of this. Well, that was the peak in June 2015. We've seen a decline in equities since that point. Part of that was driven by global concern. The numbers within the U.S. economy look fairly good in terms of unemployment, but we see our internal sort of folks at the FOMC reacting to a global community and not just our own numbers these days. Commodity prices, going back to the latter part of 2015, oil hit a low of $27 a barrel. It's increased since then. GDP growth is lower than expected. It's 0.8, and I think folks are looking for a stronger economic recovery. That's one indicator that the economists track. So we still feel here we are 6-8 years after a recession, and I think folks are still looking for that to kick in a psychological manner. Folks aren't feeling all that great about this recovery still. The FOMC, that's led the Federal Reserve and the FOMC to slow down on what we thought would be a much quicker increase in short-term rates. Since 2008 up until December of last year of 2015, the Fed fund rate was between 0 and 25. They took action in December and increased to 0.25, between 0.25 and 0.5. We expected 4 rate increases this year. We've seen none. They meet again in 2 weeks, and bets are on whether they will take action. I think the common wisdom is they likely won't because inflation is still tracking very low. So that's a quick snapshot. The volatility and the concern within the market has led investors to move to a flight to quality. We've seen this now for year after year. This benefits strong fixed income securities and highly rated entities like yourself. If you look at the three lines, a 30-year rate, a 20-year rate, and a my eyes are failing on me, a 30-year rate, a 10-year rate, and a 5-year rate. All the rates from 5 to 30 years are on the decline. That said, you'll see quite a bit of volatility. You see quite a bit of squiggly up and down in these rates historically, all reacting to an uncertain economy. So the theme is we're in a low interest rate environment. It's very difficult to predict, and it's very volatile. Market supply. Last year was a record year. In 2015, there was $397 billion of municipal issuance. You were part of that. About 50% of this was refinancing. Folks like yourselves going out and refinancing for savings. And we'll touch on, you did the same thing. You saved $5 million on a prior issuance, but the remaining 50% was new investment. And I think folks like yourselves like to see, citizens like myself, like to see new investment and not just refinancing. This year we're down about 12%, and about 40% of that is refinancing, total volume. Interest rate forecast, we don't do our own interest rate forecast, but we do take a look at what Bloomberg, an information service, prepares. They survey about 80 economists on an ongoing basis, and here is their wisdom, their best guess. And if you look at second quarter 2016, Fed funds target is predicted to be 0.32, so that goes to say that most economists don't predict the June increase for the FOMC meeting. Few do, and so that's sort of the average of 0.32. If you look out through the fourth quarter of 2016, the 30-year Treasury, the top line, is currently about 2.59%. So that you could just let that settle in for a moment. Investors will invest dollars in purchasing U.S. Treasuries, and they'll hold that for 30 years and expect to receive an annual return of 2.6%. So just about at inflation. So you're not getting much more than principal preservation or safety of your principal in the U.S. Treasury at this point. We don't expect to see that go up too much at the end of the year 2016. The survey has it increasing to 2.99%. 10-year Treasury is the most common mark. It's at 1.75%, same concept. Investors socking their money away for 10 years, getting an annualized rate of return of 1.75. So rates continue to be very low. That's a quick market update. Any questions on sort of the market at large before we focus on your portfolio? Or additional comments?
I had a question. Yeah. With say in October when the election, what's going to happen with this? I mean, right. Well, October will start really funny season, and then
right.
How do we look on determining who's there?
You're asking about the Trump effect?
Well, since you mentioned the name.
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. I don't have a...
I bet I'm not the only one asking that, but the stock market's either going to jump or jump off the cliff.
Right. Who knows? Maybe it's an increased fear across the global community and more folks plow their dollars into treasuries. Realistically, I think it's going to be a fascinating election, and the impact will probably far transcend the financial markets. So I don't think the financial markets will react or overreact to the winner of the election. I think there's just enough uncertainty globally where folks are hunkering down and putting their dollars into safe investments. I don't think that's going to change through the end of the year. So I think there'll be a whole lot of policy questions, and I don't know if it's going to impact the financial markets as much as we think. That's my hunch. Yeah. Well, yeah, right. I stand corrected in December. Here's a snapshot on page 8 of your outstanding debt. Upper right-hand corner there are ratings. You are AAA rated, Fitch, AA plus S&P, I know Randy reached out to S&P this week, provided additional information. I think that's the sort of theme of what we're doing today, is just providing transparency, positive message, looking at Brian's slides of increased sales tax revenues through the end of the fiscal year. All of that just continues to build, so we hope to match Fitch's AAA with a second from S&P. You have $448 million of bonds outstanding. We show it by series. There are 2012 A's, 2012 B's, 2015 A's that you issued in October. The debt service structure down below, if you go back to the good old days of 2008, all you had was that blue portion, that dark blue portion. And it looked like it was a backloaded structure. We intentionally put the first issuance out there maturing from 2026 to 2034 so that you could continually stay shorter and shorter on your subsequent issuances, and those orange lines and light blue lines begin to fill in. So now this was sort of the vision and the intent, keep you at a fairly level amount of annual debt service and allow you to go to market during some of this volatility and stay very short. And so this is an interesting slide on page 9. What does that translate into cost? The authorities managed to go to the capital markets and accelerate project delivery and borrow, just looking at the outstanding amount, about $450 million to do that, to advance projects, at a sort of total weighted average cost of just over 3%, so 3.1%. And that is just a very low cost of capital. That's a very prudent approach to accessing the capital markets. And it takes some monitoring, and Randy's talking to us all the time, and it takes some sort of going back to market, refinancing, which it makes sense, and which we'll talk about in a couple pages, which you did last year. But the combined result is a very low cost of capital of 3.1%. Swap performance. Part of what we've done in the memo, and we're just pulling out here, is we track and monitor the swap. And I would argue that the swap is one of the elements that have contributed to that low cost of capital. So that's the good news. It's delivered funds, and it's kept you fairly low in terms of cost, keeping in mind as well that that was the backloaded piece. So this interest rate swap gives you an all-in cost of about 3.8%. But remember, that's all the back-end weighted portion of that debt structure. That said, there are moving parts, and we have to track those moving parts. Part of it is an accounting treatment. And the mark-to-market, if you wanted to cancel the swap and walk away tomorrow, that has a cost, and that cost is $57 million. So we don't recommend you do that. Do not recommend you do that. There is a collateral posting requirement when the mark-to-market or accounting treatment of that reaches anything above $40 million. So currently the authority has posted about $21 million in treasuries, and you keep all the interest associated with those going forward. We do look at current market rates are very low. Is there an opportunity to restructure the portfolio, de-risk the portfolio, step away from the swap so you never have to talk about it again? And currently the total cost, even though the mark-to-market is 57, you could walk away and restructure this into fixed rate debt at a cost of $28 million, which is structured over time between $1 and $5 million a year. Again, not recommended. But the takeaway on this page is we can look at the swap very surgically, and we do that, and we can strip off certain maturities. So rather, it's not an all or nothing game. We can unwind the 2026 maturity or the 27 maturity or the 28 maturity, and not the entire. So we're increasingly focused on elements of the swap and how can we unwind a portion when it makes sense. More broadly on the refunding piece, you went to market, you refunded the 2012 B bonds or a portion of those last year, saving $5.1 million. So even though rates are low on your fixed rate portfolio, there's no existing opportunities at the moment. You captured those in the last 6 months or 8 months. Future borrowing needs, I'll tee this off, but this is informed by Randy and staff. Expect to go back to market in 2017, calendar year. You didn't see it in the budget, but calendar year. That's subject to change with a range of 50 to 100 million. That's the number that's been shown to the investors and the rating agencies and the financial markets, so there's no surprise there. And and Randy could inform that further. And then lastly, you guys, in part, you have a number of factors. You have high coverage. You have a very strong economy. You see that in healthy sales tax growth. You also have a very active and energized information outreach. And that's happened under Randy's watch, and that's been very well received. And here are just a few elements of that. Everything is posted on the central repository, which we call the Electronic Municipal Market Access, which is EMMA. So there's a ton of information on EMMA. There's regular outreach to rating agencies, and then you have your own investor website on your site for investors. So that's a very nice feature. And that is the end. I'll stop and take any questions.
Not a question, but just a comment. I think this is a great report, and I look forward to future reports coming forward. I think it keeps us all well informed of how the market is doing and how CCDA is doing as a whole. Thank you.
Good, thank you.
We would just ask that the APC move this to the board for acceptance.
So moved. Second.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Morning, Chair, board members. Ivan Ramirez, construction manager, and this is an action item where we asking for authorization to issue a request for proposals for a construction management services contract for the express lanes on southbound 680. There are two major components of this contract. One is widening certain portions of 680 on the southbound direction, and the second component is installing monitoring and tolling equipment for the express lanes, beginning at the just south of the Benicio Martinez Bridge all the way through Walnut Creek. The plan specifications and estimate, or the PS&E, is expected to be at the 65% stage in the fall of this year. Is that at that time that we'd like to bring the CM firm to gain insight into issues that might come up during construction and put them into the contract, so we have a contract that has less risk as we put it out to construction. If the firm selected also is expected to perform the biddability review and also to help us advertise, award, and administer the construction contract. Before we go that direction, of course, we're going to come to the board and ask for permission to AAA that project. With that said, we expect the PS&E to be completed in the spring of 2017 and construction to begin in the fall of 2017. With that, I'm open to any questions regarding this item.
Ivan, thanks. Two things. One, a question, then a request. If we don't AAA this, then this goes to Caltrans, or does this go to MTC?
It goes to Caltrans. So one other point to add to Ivan's report, we really need two approvals. So we've obtained approval from Caltrans to advertise, administer, and award the contract, and now we're seeking your approval.
Okay, great. The other thing is some of us like to look at things. For these kinds of things, it would be nice, because I think we've all kind of forgotten to have a graphic that shows exactly the scope, the widening, where those sections are. So maybe when this comes to the full board, we could add that diagram. So when you talk about it, we can just kind of keep being visually reminded of what it is we're physically doing.
Certainly can do that.
Yeah. Otherwise, I'd move that we go forward.
First, second, any more discussion? Randy, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to say something. This, Commissioners, this actually will complete the southbound HOV lane converted to express lanes from the bridge all the way to the county, well, to Red Gear, where it's all the way down to the county line.
I'm just after to see, because there's some widening and things, so we kind of know what are the physical impacts as people are asking us, and we can say, yeah, there's a problem there. That's why we're doing this. Just good to know. There's a lot of interest now in this project. People are realizing I've noticed when they didn't put the whole sign up on the electronic readers, when they put the one up there that says that we're going to get a lot more phone calls, so it'd be nice to know the physical improvements we're doing, because as people realize the cost of this system to get in it is going to have some impact. Thanks.
Okay, let's call. Lindsay, you were going to say something? You had that look of saying something. All right. Good girl. Keep quiet, huh? We'll call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right.
Yep. Yeah, I did. And I second.
17, administrative changes to a lady that is making impact on the regular, everyday affairs here.
Good morning, Commissioners. I will discuss the background for changing the minutes from long-form verbatim style to action minutes with brief summary as needed. On October 17, 2015, the City Clerks Association of California adopted guidelines for preparing minutes for governmental agencies. The City Clerks Association of California recommends that municipalities consider adopting these guidelines that call for either brief summary or action style minutes or a combination. The City Clerks Association of California's objectives are to promote uniform standards for administering clerk duties and improve standards for efficiency. The authority currently uses the long-form style minutes. In past years, these types of minutes did serve a necessary purpose due to the fact that the public had limited access to live streaming, audio recordings, and electronic copies of agenda reports and supporting materials. However, today we're able to provide accessibility to all of these types of materials. The features and benefits for switching the minutes to action would be consistency. Most California cities have transitioned to either brief summary or action style minutes. So this would provide consistency with other governmental agencies. Also, cost savings and cost effectiveness. It will reduce the staff time to transcribe the minutes. It will also allow a reduction of materials used to preserve the archival minutes. In addition, it will remove ambiguity and misdirection unintentionally created from long-form minutes. It will omit the discussions not relevant to the final decision. The minutes will be neutral and restrained. It removes staff interpretation of statements and determination of what comments should be included. For instance, I received a request for the minutes to be changed during public comment back from November, so nearly 6 months later. We received more requests for correcting the minutes than we do for actually receiving the minutes. It places an emphasis on a collective board versus individuals, so it records the thought process of the body as a whole and eliminates single-member opinions. It also provides brevity and clarity for all audiences. Therefore, the recommendation today is to recommend the board approve the resolution to transition from long summary to action style minutes with the use of brief summary minutes as needed in order to be in compliance with the City Clerks Association of California guidelines for preparing minutes for governmental agencies. The action minutes will be used for the authority board as well as any committees formed or currently in existence where applicable. And this is in reference to the Planning Committee and the Administration and Projects Committee. We included where applicable to apply to the committees such as the Paratransit Coordinating Council that uses a summary of action versus minutes. So this will allow for flexibility in the future. To better align with the City Clerks Association of California guidelines, the approved minutes will be executed by the clerk and entered into the official records of the authority as a permanent original executed document. This will allow us to post the final original minutes to the website. Thank you for your time. Do you have any questions?
I don't have a question, just a comment. I think this is a great idea, and I would move the item.
Any more discussion? I have a first and a second.
My only comment is thank you, Terry, and you're doing a fabulous job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But let me ask you the one question. Is this going to make your work easier?
Yes. On one of the slides it mentioned that it saves 50 to 75% of time from staff transcribing minutes. So myself, Diane, and Christine will all thank you.
Whoa. Very good.
That means we're verbose.
You did good. Okay. Well, so all in favor? Opposed? And thank you so much for the report.
Thank you.
Going to 18, Hercules Rail Station.
Hi, good morning, Commissioners. My name is Stephanie Hu, Associate Engineer with the Authority. This item is an action item. The City of Hercules is seeking approval of Resolution 1634P, which will appropriate $400,000 for stakeholder and public outreach and agency coordination for the Hercules Rail Station project, more commonly known as the Hercules Intermodal Transit Center project. To give a little background and current status of this project, staff has been working with the city on this project for the last 3 to 4 years. The project, when completed, will be a multimodal transit center that provides commute alternatives with bus, train, and ferry services. The project is broken up into multiple phases. Phase 1A, which includes track area preparation and construction of the east segment of the San Francisco Bay Trail, was completed last year. Phase 1B, also known as Path to Transit, is currently underway. When it is completed in the fall, bus services will begin for routes to San Francisco and to El Cerrito del Norte station. To date, the authority has appropriated a total of $8.4 million through the Measure J strategic plan and the Transportation for Livable Communities TLC program and the PED Bike and Trail Facilities PBTF program for the 2 phases that I just described. There is currently $1.4 million of unappropriated Measure J strategic plan funds remaining for the project. The next step for the city is to secure a commitment from the Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority and San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority to provide services at the Hercules Rail Station. The requested appropriation of $400,000, if approved, will be used to create a coalition with public and private stakeholders. The goal for the coalition is to gain support for the project, communicate and understand the congestion issues on the I-80 corridor, and ultimately formulate and submit requests to the Joint Powers Authorities. The coalition will also coordinate the effort with the ongoing I-80 high-capacity transit study, as they will champion priorities established by the transit study. The city sees the work that will be done by the coalition to be complementary to the transit study. The appropriation will also fund agency coordination and technical and engineering support. The city is ready to begin work in July, and it will take 1 year to complete. The attachment A in your packet shows the scope of work and schedule. Staff would like to note that there is a shortfall of approximately $80 million for the entire project, as shown in the last quarterly project status report. Securing commitments from the Joint Powers Authority and securing funding for the project are mutually dependent. The Joint Powers Authority will likely require the project to be fully funded in order to get their commitment to provide service at the rail station. And at the same time, applications for state and federal funds will be competitive if the project shows a commitment from the rail authorities. However, it is also important to note that the Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority has supported the city's recent or past STIP and Tiger grant applications. Also, both Capital Corridor and San Joaquin Joint Powers Authorities have stated the potential of serving Hercules in their most recent business plans. The city believes the formation of the coalition will be effective in securing commitment from the Joint Powers Authority and in turn be successful in competing for funding. With that, city is requesting the approval of Resolution 1634P, which will appropriate $400,000 for stakeholder and public outreach and coordination. Public Works Director Mike Roberts and Councilwoman Chris Kelly are here to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
I'm going to start out with a question right away. We've been working with Hercules for, my goodness, for quite a while. I guess the sentence here, the authority could choose to alter the request. Could you explain what that really means? Somebody.
I guess you can change the funding amount if it's not favorable to the authority. I guess.
Well, you could. I don't know that I have a good example, but you could put conditions on the funding. This is the request here really doesn't have any conditions, so it's kind of a boilerplate type of alternate statement. But here you could You could ask for more information on how you're going to coordinate between the studies. You could put conditions. So there's, things that could come out of discussion that might ensue here. I don't have any recommendations, but that's a potential outcome after you have a discussion.
I just had a question, and I think it's a noble project. This is a little unusual request for funding. I don't recall us, the years I've been around, that we're putting money to go out and promote a project. I'm a little concerned. I like the project, but we're not building anything. We're not designing anything. Because that's not in the request. In the letter, it's all about promoting this. And I'm just concerned that that's within our jurisdiction based on what sometimes might be consistency. If we consistently as an agency use funding for XYZ items, that if we have a request like this and it's not something that we've done, is it a precedent? Is it actually allowed for us to do this? Because it is different. It's promoting. It's trying to build up support. I'm just a little concerned we don't do that. And so really a question back to staff, and I don't know if there's a legal question or if either one of the Randys have an opinion. I want to make sure we're doing the right things so it doesn't get. We don't want to do something that would bring negative attention to us, and more so not something that would be criticized back to Hercules, which would make it harder for them to achieve their goal.
That was going to be my chime in also, and that's why I asked the question. What with the option, if it doesn't look good, or if it is a promotional deal, so I don't know. I'm not quite sure how you fit promotion in with CCTA.
Commissioners, I guess the best way to answer the question is this. On every project that we are in control of, we do some form of outreach, and it's embedded in the support costs that we associate with the project. In this case, the project is progressing, and as each major phase is developed, the support costs may not be enough in order to do the outreach that, in this case, the city deems necessary to garner support. And so it is not a normal use of measured dollars per se from the perspective of asking for a lump sum, but we do allocate dollars in the support piece to make sure that we do the outreach to the right entities to garner support. And so that's the reason why, and other than the fact that no option is not an option, you can modify this request to safeguard what you think is the normal course that we use for public outreach and stakeholder outreach.
Right, because I was going to say the public outreach we do is to gather information. If we say, let's say we have an idea, we want to fix this problem, we reach out to the public, get their comments on solving that problem, take that input, modify our project just as we go through a public hearing process to make a better project. This doesn't speak at all about that. So if it did do that, then it'd be like, okay, we already have the idea. We want to, because when you read the last parts here, it just says media briefings, stakeholder outreach, continue media briefings, and then they're going to submit a request for funding to these other two agencies. It doesn't talk about that this process is to gather information and to help modify the project, to build a project, redesign it based on public outreach. This just, and again, I love all the people standing here. This is just a sales package, and I'm really concerned that that's not what we do. And I would look that if we're going to do this, that it would say that we're going to go out to the public to validate what we have done, in terms of what's proposed. And if that's not defined, then we ought to be honest. If that project is well-defined and they're going to go out and find out public input on that, and that's the purpose of this, before they submit, then there's value to that.
Let me comment here a minute, because I understand where the concern is coming from, but I want to remind us all that we did a huge outreach package for Highway 4. We had media people on staff. We had postcard mailings. We had all kinds of publicity about Highway 4, about what we were planning to do ahead of time. And it cost a fortune. We did community meetings. We did all kinds of things. Those were built in mostly to the Highway 4 project. But if I remember correctly, there was an augmented contract specifically for media and outreach to the Highway 4 project. So in some ways, this is following that same pattern. And maybe staff remembers better than I do. They were far more involved in that. But I know we hired people specifically to do that outreach. And it was an extensive program, and there were very colorful mailers and things like that that went out on a regular basis for that project. So if that's the kind of thing we're talking about for this, I don't think it's necessarily inappropriate.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I'm sorry, I agree with you. And the last thing I said was, if it was about the project and going out to the public, and they're taking that input in a way that would modify the project.
But we didn't. We just told people what we were going to do. We said we're coming through, and here's what we're here to do.
We were asking for their input as part of that, and I don't see that in this case. So I'm just saying.
I think it was both, but I defer to staff.
Okay.
You want to talk? Well, let me just jump in a second. I think Mike probably wants to jump in as well. To respond to Commissioner Arnerich's question, I think it's a good question as part of one that I've had. What Randy talked about, this is a subset, and both with Commissioner Pierce as well, it's a subset of what we traditionally call program project management. It's managing the project to bring it to fruition. So possibly the answer to your question, Commissioner Arnerich, is how is the rest of the program management activities being performed to continue to plan the project? It doesn't do any good to promote the project if you don't have a plan, and that might be something that Mike could address, and maybe that will help answer your question.
Commissioners, I want to just tack on that real quick. So as Ross said, normally it's embedded. So normally we do project-specific outreach. So we're going to close Interstate 80 Saturday night from next Saturday? The 18th again. So we're going to do a massive amount of outreach. That comes out of the CM contract, of which about 1%, Ivan, 2%, 5%? Is for, so we have a consultant on staff. We do project-specific outreach. We generally don't do any lobbying with the railroads or whoever else embedded in that contract. It's specifically for project-related activities to warn the public, or as you said, to gather public input and make sure they're aware that we are coming through their neighborhoods. But we don't lobby Washington, D.C. or whoever using these dollars.
Good morning, Commissioners. Mike Roberts, Hercules Public Works Director. Thanks for your consideration this morning. I wanted to let you know that your prior commitments to date of Measure J dollars, both the strategic plan, PBTF, and what was the last one? TLC, are hard at work out in Hercules delivering this regionally significant project. As Stephanie mentioned, we did complete the Bay Trail, which was a $7 million improvement. Created the additional right-of-way needed for the third track that will serve the station, as well as eliminated 2/3 of a mile of a gap in the Bay Trail. It's heavily being used. Currently, we are under construction on our $11 million Path to Transit project, which also includes Measure J funding, and that is providing direct access to the future station. So, to my knowledge, all the allocations to date have gone to costs directly related to delivering the project. one of the things we've come to realize is we absolutely need a commitment from Capital Corridor in order to continue to move forward successfully. And what's before you is the strategy that we think will be most effective. And with that, we have consulted with Graybo and Scott for their assistance. Matt Todd's here today, and I think I'd like to ask him to briefly walk through the scope of the project, which I understand the effort is similar to the Caldecott fourth bore, as well as the I-680 improvements in Alameda County. So I think that was the template used for the strategy. Thank you.
And I'd like to, as you address this, how did you come up with the number 400,000? So, I mean, you might want to figure that one or give us some explanation.
Right. Hello. Good morning, Commission. Matt Todd, Graybo, and Scott. So really what this effort is, it's a combination of education outreach and also engineering support to, as we talk to these stakeholders, that we are able to respond to them, provide them more technical information, and bring them along. Really the main thrust of this effort is to foster and gain support from this broad coalition along I-80. I think there is in West Contra Costa, everyone agrees this is a big problem. They're in it every day. This is also a regional problem from Sacramento to Santa Clara. Part of that is this Capital Corridor JPA. It has representatives from Santa Clara all the way to north of Sacramento. And part of that is educating them on what are the issues and what are the needs to get this project moving, and that's going to help our local congestion, freight, daily traffic, as well as that regional traffic between Sacramento and the Bay Area. For the overall costs, we are looking at about 25–30% of those funds are for technical efforts that would be responding to railroad Capital Corridor questions about how would this project work, how would it affect their facilities, so we can respond to some of their maybe more technical questions and clear some of those barriers that those might create as they ask about how things would be impacted on this rail corridor. This would also work hand in hand with the high-capacity transit study, in that these are the short and medium-term improvements for this rail corridor are proposed in that study as one of the items to address, and this would be supporting that and moving that forward so those could be implemented.
And I don't wanted to add to that. At the last WICTAC meeting, we actually are moving forward with the high-capacity study. And the consultant recommended 5 options for us to look at. You know, I-80 is the most highly congested corridor in the Bay Area right now, and we really need to do significant things along this corridor to ease that congestion. And one of the options we came up with, or that the consultant came up with, is more short-term, mid-term, and long-term solutions. And one of the short-term solutions is moving forward on the station in Hercules to allow earlier access for people to get off 80 and tie into both the rail. It allows the rail to tie into BART at Richmond. It gives greater access for people in the northern part of the county as well as the central part of West County to gain access to Martinez with the closure of the hospital, which has become an increasingly important issue. It also ties into some more underserved, disadvantaged communities in the northern part of the county and giving them greater access to various kinds of transit, which allows them to have greater access to housing, jobs, all the things that are important in terms of moving people in our county forward and giving them the opportunities that transportation allows them to have. The board voted overwhelmingly for the recommendations the consultant had, and you know, we have money in the TEP to support moving these things forward, and you know, I would ask that you move this forward because this is a key piece. And it has been mentioned, this has been done on other projects, and maybe it's been done in terms of a project where there are various components and we're coming with one component rather than being part of a bigger proposal. But there has been a lot of public outreach, both in terms of the ITC as well as the high capacity study. And we want to be complementary to the high-capacity study. We don't want to be in competition to it. And there's more public outreach on the high-capacity study planned for the fall. And this is supposed to be complementary to all that and working towards solutions for the, again, highly impacted I-80 corridor. So anyhow.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit as the authority's representative to the San Joaquin JPA, because obviously the Capital Corridor Service is more important to Hercules because it has twice the frequency that the San Joaquins do, but the issues are the same in many ways for both agencies. And where I'm going with this is I think this would probably be helpful if Attachment A were rewritten by the time it gets to the authority so that some of the points that have been brought out today could be made more clear. But the kind of things that we would consider, and probably Capital Corridor considers, when you look at a new stop, is the new stop helps some of the people who now would get off at that stop who wouldn't otherwise, who are already on the train. On the other hand, for everybody else, it's a longer travel time. And so that's a degradation of service. At the same time, it's an additional stop for the railroads with whom we have to negotiate because we don't own these tracks. And the railroads are very protective of their tracks and their track times. And so I think and so what helps us understand is how much does our ridership change as a result of adding the station? And if the public outreach can lead to that kind of forecast, then that's useful because then that's something that we can put into our plans. The other part that I think I heard mentioned that would be useful is I know there have been some discussions with what kind of track changes are needed in the Hercules areas to make this possible. And I assume that goes back to your budget, and I think some of that work has already been done. Go ahead.
Mike Roberts might be able to answer that, but there is a third track planned as part of this, as well as some other mitigation efforts. And I believe Matt might be able to answer this. A ridership study is part of this. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, we have, again, about 25 to 30% are for technical support, so we can answer those questions like what would a ridership projection be? How would you account for a third track? What's been done to date? What still needs to be done? It's really to help answer these I'll say, hurdles to get to that end line.
And that's good to hear. I'll say that doesn't come across in Attachment A, and it's come across very well in the discussion today.
Right. So you want a little more clarity.
Yeah, because I mean, I can say what we would look at is how many more people are we going to put on our trains as a result of this? How does that compare to the effect on schedules? Is the railroad on board? Things like that. The other thing I would point out, a stop both in Hercules and Oakley is in our current business plan that we adopted a few months ago. Just in terms of your schedule, if you come to us with a submit request to us in May of June, you will have missed our next business plan cycle. So you need to be a few months earlier. So.
Yeah, I would add, I agree with Don. That's kind of what my point was. I think before it comes back, I would recommend we move this forward to the full board, but rewrite this. Maybe let Gray Bowen summarize just what we did, rewrite the letter of request for that scope of work that includes the discussion. And I think this lines up with what Julie's saying, and I think we're all saying, but I think on face value, the concern is the way it is. It isn't as comprehensive as you're saying it's going to be. So let's put the comprehension in there. And I'd be glad to move it forward and recommend that we move it.
I would second that with an additional comment that I think what was involved in our discussion today that doesn't come across in the memo is how this is serving a section of the county that is currently underserved. And I think you need to put that into the context as well. It's clearly something that can, by better serving this part of the county with rail service you actually have a potential, and we'll find that out as we go forward with the I-80 study, but you actually have the potential to reduce some of the demand on the rest of the transportation network. And so it's a balancing act, and I think, you need to have more of that information to be able to argue better when you go to the Capital Corridor, when you go to UP, when you go to all of these other agencies and make your pitch. Clearly, you've been back to Washington over and over and over again, and we don't seem to be getting anywhere there. So clearly, more information and a better package is necessary. So I think you can make that case to put that package together.
I would just add one last thing. I know, Chair. This is important. We've spent a lot of money on this issue. I just think we have to be honest about this. This, to me, is your effort. You need to be able to establish this. You're a long way down the road and still asking some basic questions that I think we need to make sure that this effort, we realistically look at the results of this before we start funding any more money for this project in the future. We need to see that it's moving forward. It's all great ideas. And as Don's pointing out, some obvious things that I think are maybe out of sync. I think they need to get synced up better, and we need to start to see some real facts. And it may say ridership is going to improve or it's not. And we've got to be honest about that. And if it's not, you're never going to get anywhere. So hopefully this effort will solidify all that and get everybody on board. And we'd love to see it one day, but I think it's got to move the pendulum a little bit more.
And I'd like to thank you all for your comments and input. I think it adds to what we're trying to do. And as I said, this is a key early component of the high capacity study to address the traffic on 80. So thank you.
And I'm not against it either, but I'm going to piggyback on all my fellow members here. Will CCTA monitor, like, if you request 200,000 or 300,000, do we say, where is it going? How's it going? Do we just give the 400,000 and there it is?
Maybe I should address, I think it's a question for staff. So,
okay.
Like all of our grants, it's on a reimbursement basis, so we have to incur costs. So it's not just do it. And we monitor against both the project scope and the scope and any potential conditions that you would approve. Susan pointed out to me, and we'll think about this before the authority meeting, on page 18-10, that's the actual resolution to appropriate funds. There is a line in there that says other conditions. So if you would like to say, what I'm kind of hearing here is you want more technical detail before you go out and start doing some of the outreach. Yes. So that might be a condition that you would put in. So we can think about that and bring it back, and then we would monitor that the work is performed consistent with whatever conditions we put on it.
Because our mission here is to try to vet out what we're doing, so before it gets to the full board,
yeah, and
the clarity, et cetera, because we'll have most of those questions answered.
And I would suggest that Hercules and the Gray Bowen team that's working with them probably can suggest on their own, in addition with staff, to things that they can do to make this more responsive and more transparent about how the funds are going to be used. To answer the concerns I'm sure they have heard loud and clear this morning.
With all that being said, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. And thank you very much for your patience and listening to us. But I'm glad we might be able to clarify a lot of those issues.
Thank you very much.
Okay. 19, correspondence and news clippings. Commissioner staff comments?
Commissioners, Ivan, so it's June 18th, full closure again. We're going to adjust the false work to make sure the geometry is correct. Rather than do it half freeway at a time, they're going to close the entire section. It'll be done faster. Our last, I apologize for not getting you the good news bad news faster. This was good news. It did work, and the freeway was open as promised. Yesterday, we had a media day in the morning, an open house with Honda. I think every news outlet in the Bay Area was there.
Front page of the paper today.
Front page of the paper.
Yeah, they made it, it was unbelievable, the amount of enthusiasm and the questions and the comments. 67 articles hit our news clipping service. It puts CCT on the front page of the newspaper, so in a positive way, hopefully, that's good news. And then in the afternoon, we had Congressman DeSaulnier and Supervisor Anderson, who's really tech savvy. She loves technology, and so she was there, and a lot of staffers, and we took them back out on tours, probably 100 degrees. And Jack Hall made the newspaper because he was walking across he was the walking dummy, I guess, for the event. And lucky he didn't get hit, and the car operated properly. But really, it kind of shocked the world. And I think ultimately, you're going to see when the Easy Mile self-shared autonomous vehicles delivered, and we start testing that, that'll make the front page of most major newspapers, because it's going to be the first application of a first and last mile solution in North America. So we're excited about that, but there was a lot of media attention yesterday on Momentum Station, Contra Costa Transportation Authority, and Honda. Pardon? And the city of Concord, yes, in the city of Concord.
Yeah, it was in the paper.
So special thanks to Lindsay and her team. Irene was out there giving her, it was hot, and they were all out there making sure everybody was taken care of. There's water and guiding people to their right location. I know Irene's really enthused about the outreach piece of what the organization does, and so she's trying to get ingrained into that. So if there's any questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll adjourn. Next meeting Thursday, July 7th, 2016, 8:30. Brentwood will have corn at the mayor's conference tonight. Just have to bring that up, and hope to see a lot of people there.
No,